was a really unusual movie for its time, right? It was, and most of the Coen Brothers movies are kind of unusual.
They're pretty unique.
Yeah, you definitely know a Coen Brothers movie when you see it. They're one of they're I guess two of the most creative directors on the American cinematic landscape, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, this one was unusual even for them because they sort of went back into this sepia tone, rich 1930s environment in the
Depression era,
South.
Deep South.
Yeah.
Really interesting setting, loosely based on The Odyssey by Homer. Very loosely based.
So here's a little bit of trivia. Apparently, when they all showed up on set to do this, they did loosely base the movie on The Odyssey, but no one had actually read The Odyssey. Except for Tim Blake Nelson, who was Delmar,
the dumb character.
He's simple. He's
simple
a
character.
Sweet, simple character. But yes,
Delmar's great.
He was apparently a classics major at Brown.
Okay.
And so he was the only one who had actually read The Odyssey before the movie began.
See, I really sympathize with this. Like, be like, man, yeah, we should base this movie off one of the classics, like The Odyssey. Yeah. Have you read it? No. We'll figure it out as we go.
It'll be fine.
We'll figure it out as they go.
We're in a tight spot.
Well, I would say that they did. There are a lot of really interesting moments throughout the film connected with The Odyssey. I actually have a little list here.
Don't pick up the notes yet.
Not yet. Okay. All right.
First, why don't you unpack what the movie is actually about?
Yeah. Okay. So the movie is about no notes. I'm not looking at that. So the movie is about three convicts who are part of a chain gang. They broke off the chain gang. They're on the run, ostensibly to find a buried treasure that George Clooney's character, Ulysses Everett McGill, says, hey, I knocked over an armored truck. I buried the treasure. $1 million. $1.2. And so he convinces the two other members of this chain gang that were chained to him to break out with him and evade the authorities and get this treasure before it'll be lost forever. Because it's
going to be flooded.
Yeah, it's in a valley that's they're going to put in a dam, so they're flooding it.
Yeah.
So, ticking clock, they only have a limited time.
We got about 4 days to get to that treasure. After that, it'll be at the bottom of a lake.
But we find out, well, maybe that treasure
No. Anyway. Yeah.
Maybe it's a little bit of a fabrication. So
there ain't no treasure.
Because Ulysses definitely has some. He can tell a tall tale every once in a while.
Yeah, Everett can spin a yarn, definitely. And,
he definitely can. So that's sort of the setup.
That's the setup. Yep.
But as they go out, they first meet this blind man working one then hand carts on the railroad.
Yep.
I think
they
it's
fall
really,
off the train.
They
try to get on a train, they fall off.
But that was hilarious.
Yeah.
They hop on this hand cart. Oddly enough, the old guy is pumping the thing.
Yep.
I have no name.
None of the rest of them help at all.
No. No one offers to help.
But he talks about how they're going to go on a huge, long journey.
Yes.
But they will be fine at the end. They won't find the treasure that they're looking for, but they will find a treasure.
Right.
They will also find a cow on the top of a roof.
The roof of a cotton house.
You shall see a cow on the roof of a cotton house.
Cotton house.
Cotton house. Yes, I thought that was very interesting because we're going to dig into some of the spiritual connections. I think spirituality is really woven deeply into this movie in a lot of ways, and so this blind man really served as kind of like an oracle type figure.
He is Homer in a way.
In a way, I think.
Homer's the author of the original Odyssey.
Right. You could connect it with Homer. I think you could connect it with a character in the Odyssey as well that Odysseus goes to see in the underworld that kind of foretells what his journey, what is to come, right? So you have this character, and I love that you brought up, you're going to find the fortune, or find a fortune, but it will not be the fortune that you seek.
It would not be the fortune you seek.
And I think that fortune definitely could be tied in with spirituality and even salvation, an eternal fortune.
which I can't wait to get into.
Yeah.
One of the things that I love about this movie is that it sort of goes, well, first, actually, we need to talk just very briefly.
Sure.
A lot of these conversations that we have on Rewind are not necessarily family friendly. These sort of go beyond what we would consider to be family friendly movies. We want to make sure that you're aware of that so you don't sit your kids down to watch this, because this movie does have some problems. It has some swearing, that type of stuff, but it does have a lot of heft to it.
It does. There's a lot of really spiritual heft that we can talk about, and that's kind of the idea behind the conversations as well. Is we want to find certain movies that have that heft, and we want to dig into that a little bit more and find those connections.
And this definitely has that. What we have here is really sort of a travelogue of these characters. You know, they are
a road trip movie in some way.
It's a road trip movie. It is very much like Odysseus in The Odyssey, right? He is off on his own. He's doing these adventures. He meets these demigods, deals with the gods, deals with these monsters. And that's kind of what a lot of the characters within Oh Brother, Where Art Thou also deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. Will you let me?
Absolutely.
Can I look at my notes now?
Oh
okay.
my goodness, notes.
I put together a list. I know this is notes, really like engaging.
Okay, so I've used notes too, but still, anyway.
But I wanted to go through just a few of the connections that I found with the Odyssey specifically. So Ulysses, the name of our main character, that's the Romanized version of Odysseus. So our main character, Ulysses Everett McGill. His wife, her name is Penny. Penelope was Odysseus's wife.
Correct. And just to let you know, in the actual Odyssey, that it really does sort of align with that, because Odysseus wanted to get back to his wife because his wife was being wooed by 108 suitors.
A lot of suitors.
In the original book. This one, there's only one other suitor, but it's still important.
Vernon T. Waldrip.
Waldrip? Vernon Waldrip. Vernon T. Waldrip.
Yes, just one. But he's bona fide.
But you ain't bona fide.
He is bona fide. What has Ulysses ever done?
Vernon here's got a job. Vernon's got prospects. He's bona fide. What are you?
Anyway, we'll get into that.
So you got Penny, and yes, she has a suitor.
He's a suitor.
Big Dan. Big Dan Teagues, right? The Bible salesman. Patch over his eye.
Fraudulent Bible
salesman. Has a patch over his eye. The Cyclops. That would be the connection there, right? Pappy O'Daniel. I didn't realize this until my most recent rewatch of this. So Pappy's not his real name. You know what his real name is?
Menelaus.
Menelaus.
That's Governor Menelaus.
That's a character in the Odyssey. Actually was the husband of Helen of Troy. So kicks off the story.
King of Sparta back in the day.
Yeah, so that's interesting. We even have a Homer Stokes, friend of the little man, as he says. We have the sirens. There's the scene.
The sirens?
The main characters encounter the sirens along the way, and their songs just would, in Greek mythology, would drive men to their deaths. Something not quite to that, but something similar happens in the film as well. And then we talked about the Oracle.
I work for no man.
Yeah.
As well. So lots of connections, I think, to the Odyssey, and yet in terms of the spiritual elements of this movie, it's very rooted in that kind of gospel southern element here.
So, and I think that's one of the most interesting elements of this movie, right? It takes place in the 1930s, deep South. It's a very religious place and at a fairly religious time. It's right during the Great Depression. We hear a lot about that.
Yeah.
And so you have these elements where people are sort of seeking answers.
Right.
So you do have a lot of spiritual connection points. One of the cool things about this movie is the soundtrack.
The music, yeah.
The music
we should talk about
is wonderful because it's all this old-timey bluegrass type of stuff.
Yep.
It'll make you want to actually pull up a bunch of old songs and listen to them.
Yeah, old time gospel music in a lot of ways. And I would say the majority of the songs, they're Christian songs or Christian hymns, right?
It leans into that so hard.
It really leans into it. Some really big moments in the movie for the characters. the river baptism scene, as I went down to the river to pray. I love that rendition, right? You have all those people
My favorite
singing.
song in the entire movie.
Yeah, that's
it is
up there.
So beautiful.
That's up there. I'll Fly Away. That song is sung as well. Just a lot of others. I would say you could even make the case that the main song in this movie, Man of Constant Sorrow, that is sung by the Soggy Bottom Boys. Man of Constant Sorrow.
We should have worn fake beards.
We should have. That's what we should have done. I know. It was staring us right in the face and we didn't think of it. But that main song, though, even though the song is not about Jesus, it's about a guy who's down on his luck, it does end with the promise that God gives of salvation and eternal life. That's like the last line of the song.
Yeah.
And I would say you could also make the case that the title of the song, Man of Constant Sorrows, could have been derived from Isaiah 53:3, which talks about Jesus as the man of sorrow.
Yeah. It is fascinating to me how the Coen Brothers weave this in. So you've got these interesting little pagan echoes with the Odyssey themes. You have some supernatural happenings, but then you have this amazing sort of Christian wrapper around the whole thing. Now, if you're familiar with the Coen Brothers at all, you know that in a lot of their movies, they lean toward this sense of life is a little bit meaningless. It's a little bit random. You just don't know what life is going to bring. They talk a lot about, they do explore a lot of spiritual themes.
Yeah.
They don't come with a lot of answers. One of the reasons why I like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is it leans into a potential answer.
It does.
And I really love the characters that we see here. Delmar, we've already referenced him.
Yep.
He's this simple, sweet, very simple-minded person who's probably the most religious character.
I've been redeemed. The preacher done washed away all my sins and transgressions.
He has like a childlike faith.
He has a childlike faith. When he comes to that baptism scene that you referenced earlier, he's the guy who rushes into the river and is baptized right away. My sins have been washed away. I am good with God and everybody else. And Ulysses, the cynic, scientific, very proud of his own intellect.
Man of reason.
Man of reason.
At least that's how he would see himself. He's the man of reason.
Ain't this place a geographical oddity? 2 weeks from everywhere.
What does he characterize himself as? A free agent? He is
unaffiliated.
I guess I'm the only one that remains unaffiliated.
He is, as of yet, unaffiliated.
Right. And doesn't plan on being affiliated anytime soon.
So he spends a lot of the movie sort of poo-pooing some of these stranger supernatural events that
always wants to explain it away.
There's a perfectly scientific explanation for what just happened.
Always wants to explain it away, and he talks to Delmar, and he talks to Pete, the third character,
Turturro,
about just how silly they can be to think, that a baptism is going to do anything.
Right.
Baptism. You two are just dumber than a bag of hammers.
One of the lines is, you might be squared away with God, but the state of Mississippi is a little more hard-nosed.
Even if it did put you square with the Lord, the state of Mississippi is a little more hard-nosed.
So I don't know whether we want to jump right to the end just yet.
Well, I'd love to talk a little bit more about the characters. Because,
let's do.
Because I think that each one kind of embodies, and the ending is important, but each one kind of embodies different approaches to hearing the gospel. Right? Hearing faith. Like you mentioned, Delmar, he sees the people going down and being baptized in the river.
Right.
And he is just drawn to it. He runs into the river, rushes into the river, talks to the preacher, he's baptized, and he has that throughout the film. It just fits with his character. He has more of that like childlike faith.
He does have that childlike faith, and you don't know whether this was a part of his character before or whether it became part of his character, but you do see these elements where he is truly the most righteous amongst them.
Right.
Right? When Ulysses and Pete, they steal this pie, he leaves a couple of dollars to replace it. He is the guy who stands up to the Bible salesman.
Well, and before that too, he has all of like the butterflies are like landing on him.
The butterflies.
So yeah,
it's a very Snow White moment.
Right, he's very pure in that way. You said that Everett, played by George Clooney, he's the cynic, right? He sees himself as the man of reason, has to explain away. There has to be a reason, a natural reason for everything, right? But Pete, I almost feel like is kind of the lost man in there, but he has an interesting journey as well, because he gets baptized right after Delmar.
Right.
It's almost as if Delmar in many ways evangelizes to both of Everett and Pete, and Pete accepts. Then Pete runs to get baptized, right? Yeah. Throughout the film, I think we see Pete as the character who really wrestles with sin and his faith as he goes, right? And is really struggling with temptations and different things like that. He's the one that really, I think, embodies kind of that walk that a lot of us go on, right?
Well, and it's interesting. I want to give a couple of other spins on these characters because they're fascinating. What you say is absolutely right on point. You could also read them in some ways as almost a Freudian id, ego, superego type of thing.
Okay.
You know, because you have the id, which is essentially you have these animalistic impulses that are in us. That's sort of the id, right? And Pete, you see him when he's lured by the sirens. You can tell there is no stopping him.
Right.
Pull over right now. I am going to go there, and no matter what.
Right.
You could look at Ulysses Everett as sort of the ego, which is sort of the thoughtful thinking man. This is sort of my intellect, this is my reason. And even though Delmar is such a simple character, he could sort of embody that superego, where he's looking at more complicated issues like right and wrong.
Right.
He has that sense of faith.
We thought you was a toad.
Now, Freud was not a man of faith, but you could read that into him. The other thing that I was thinking of during this movie is how you could picture them. Not only is this about the Odyssey, there's a Wizard of Oz vibe going on here.
Okay.
Too. Like, and you see this most transparently. There's a scene where they go and they meet this whole big Ku Klux Klan rally.
Yeah.
And you see them looking over this ridge, which is exactly what the characters in The Wizard of Oz did when they looked over and saw the Wicked Witch's castle and all the soldier. You even hear, even the music sounds the same. That low it has that same vibe, right?
Yeah.
And you could look at the characters as sort of Dorothy's three companions. You've got Ulysses Everett as the Scarecrow.
Yep.
You've got Delmar as the Tin Man, all heart, and you have Pete as sort of this cowardly lion type of person, because he actually does commit a cowardly act toward the end.
I'm awful sorry I betrayed you, fellas.
Well, that's true. That's a good point. I think that's interesting the way you look at that. Now, the Ku Klux Klan scene. I mean,
wow.
I will say I think the Coens do a good job of making that both very like hellish and frightening, and then they do a good job of flipping to a lot of the absurdity with it as well.
Yes.
And I would touch on a point where what I think this movie, the line that it walks is very interesting because of its setting, which was obviously an intentional choice. They wanted to make a movie in this setting, and then the spirituality running through it. I think it'd be very easy for a filmmaker to look at the Deep South, Depression era, 1930s, and see a lot of hypocrisy, right?
And we see a lot of hypocrisy.
And we do see a lot of hypocrisy, but that being the only thing, right, that maybe a filmmaker would choose to focus on, right? Because this is such a time that is influenced by religion, right? By Christianity in a lot of ways. It's something I found very interesting about that era and that time period, where it's like, man, how could such a place and time be so influenced by Christianity and the gospel music and that faith, and yet we see terrible things like racism and segregation, and the Ku Klux Klan obviously had a hold in certain areas there too. So that balance, I think, is handled very well by the Coens. We do see a lot of hypocrisy. Obviously, Big Dan is the very fraudulent Bible salesman, right?
He's like the ultimate example.
Right. Making copious amounts of money in service of God Almighty. It's like
there are vast amounts of money to be made in the service of God Almighty.
And they lean into that, but they also really lean into some sincere faith.
Absolutely.
With our characters, and then if you want to touch on the ending, where does Everett get by the end, right?
Man, I tell you what, there's so many places we could go with this. I wanted to mention sort of that scene where Big Dan, the betrayal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So Big Dan takes Ulysses and Delmar. Pete has been turned into a frog at this point. So he takes them out for a little bit of a picnic lunch. He forces them to pay for it.
Right.
He knows they have a lot of money. He means very ill will, but he's still talking a very good game.
He identifies Everett as a sucker pretty early. So.
Exactly. And all of a sudden he rips off this tree branch and he starts whacking people. He hits Delmar across the head. Everett...
I don't get it, Big Dan.
He's just sitting there.
He still thinks it's part of a lesson.
But Delmar knows what's going on.
Yeah,
so and the reason why I bring that up is because it does sort of show that tension between how faith can be used and misused. And the true, pure faith that Delmar has. He has been saved. He has been cleansed. He sees that evil. And he literally attacks it.
Right.
Not very effectively, but he knows what's going on. And Ulysses Everett, he has no clue until he's actually hit by the tree branch.
Well, and there's another piece that's funny because blindness is a recurring theme throughout the movie. You have the Oracle. You have the radio station manager, who they record their song. He's blind. Mm-hmm. In a lot of ways, Everett, I think, is portrayed as suffering from blindness as well. Yeah. Certainly in the scene with Big Dan, right? He's just clueless.
I don't get it.
He's clueless until he gets hit upside the head with a tree branch. But also
sometimes we need that, right?
Well, that's fair. But also in, I think, some other ways too. We find out throughout the movie, the reason that the authorities are able to track these guys so well is because Everett cannot give up his hair pomade, his Dapper Dan man, and it's everywhere. So you see old hound dogs are sniffing out this Dapper Dan. That's the reason why they're following them so close. But Everett cannot. He can't give up his vanity. He can't give up his hair treatment, right? In that way, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's some blindness there too of he's one of the big reasons why the authorities are so hot on their tail.
Absolutely.
Well, we have to talk about the authorities too.
We do have to talk about the authorities, and this is actually a good place, although I'd love to talk more about Dapper Dan, because it does have that element of pride. Like, pride is like the main sin.
Yeah.
There are theologians who believe that all sins sort of come from that sense of pride. That is what Ulysses deals with. But the authorities, when you talk about the blindness, one thing that I realized only in this very moment, the main bad guy for the whole thing, he's this sheriff, law enforcement.
Sheriff Cooley.
Cooley.
Sheriff Cooley is his name. We don't really learn his name because strongly implied, I would say, by the film, that Sheriff Cooley is the devil.
Right. We hear from one of the characters who supposedly sold his soul
Tommy.
at a crossroads.
Tommy.
To the devil, said,
"He's white, as white as you folks, with empty eyes and a big hollow voice. He loved to travel around with a mean old hound." That's right.
Mean old hound dog.
this really adorable bloodhound.
Yeah.
But you do see that whenever you see him on screen, the Sheriff Cooley, you see those mirrored sunglasses. And the mirrored sunglasses, they convey another sense because you can't see his eyes and because blindness is such a huge part of this entire movie. That's an interesting bit of symbolism there. The other thing reflected always in those glasses, fire.
Fire, yep. Usually when he's talking, especially in the night scenes, you'll see constantly there's fire flickering in one of those lenses, which, man, they do a really good job of making that guy.
They make him look evil.
Pretty intimidating.
That is one actually fantastic thing. I think the Coen Brothers might do villains better than any other group of directors.
Yep. I think you have a good case for that. And there's something to be said for some subtlety and just, you know, it doesn't take much always, but man, when you see that guy and you see his big old dark glasses, reflective glasses, and there's just fire reflected in him as he's talking. Your friends have abandoned you.
Your two friends have abandoned you, Pete.
You know, I mean, that's pretty intimidating stuff, right?
It is terrifying. He is a terrifying character.
Yes.
It's interesting that whenever we see him, there's the flame within his eyes. You have lots and lots of symbolism going on with fire and with water.
Yes.
And I find that super, super interesting.
That is super interesting. Obviously the baptism early on as well, but then near the end, we want to go there. The end of the movie, they're going to be flooding this valley, right? To put in the dam. So Everett, Pete, Delmar, and Tommy is with them at the time.
Right.
So they're feeling good. They've been running from the law the whole movie.
They've been pardoned.
They've been pardoned through a series of many, many different events. They've been pardoned. So they're feeling great. They're going with Everett.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. They're going with Everett to his, I don't know if his boyhood home or something.
To pick up a ring.
To pick up a ring, right? So he can be remarried to his wife, Penny. Right?
Good old Penny.
So they're there. They're feeling great. Well, who's...
His 7 daughters.
And 7 daughters.
6 daughters.
7, Daddy.
That ain't your daddy, Alvanel. Your daddy was hit by a train.
Who's there waiting for him? Sheriff Cooley. And they say, wait, we've been pardoned, right? It went out on the radio. What does Sheriff Cooley say?
We don't have a radio.
We don't got no radio.
We don't got no radio.
Well, we ain't got a radio.
They know at that point they're in serious trouble, right? And they're getting ready to be hanged by this guy.
Yeah. Another interesting bit of symbolism is you've got those 3 graves, right? It did remind me, clearly none of these characters are particularly Christ-like, but it did remind me of the 3 people crucified in the crucifixion story.
Yeah, that's a great connection.
So
well, and so they're just flabbergasted because they're just thinking, man, we did all of this, we got pardoned, and yet we're not going to be able to outrun our fate here, right? And so all they can do in that moment is pray. They pray to God for deliverance.
The sheriff actually says, you better pray.
Yeah, of all things, right? And his undoing, I think.
And I love, you probably know the actual lines better than I do, but this character that we see, Ulysses, who has been so dismissive of faith throughout the entire movie, all of a sudden there he is. He has been humiliated. You know, I think that the Dapper Dan stuff is a sign of his pride, right? He always cares about his hair. That's all gone now. He is truly on his knees, both physically and emotionally, and really spiritually, where he says he's at the end of his rope, and he is trying to just beg God to let him see his daughters one more time. Let him see his wife. And
prays for his friends. He comes to the end of his reason.
Right.
I think that's the climax of the film.
It is the climax of
all
the
this
film.
Crazy stuff happens. And yet the climax of the film is Everett coming to the end of his reason and just having to reach out to God and be like, let me see my family again. Let me see my daughters. For Pete, for Delmar, for Tommy.
The only thing that will save them all is a miracle. And then you start to see the water trickle in, and whoa,
huge wave.
And it's It's a great echo. It's a great cinematic echo of that baptism scene.
I
right?
agree. Yeah, I felt the same way.
Because all of a sudden the waters rush in, and it's this incredible literally cleansing moment where everything is washed away. We see the dog floating in the water. We see Dapper Dan cans
but we see those
everywhere.
glasses. We see those hollow glasses. It's the devil has been washed away here.
Yeah.
And I think in many ways, right, it's symbolic of, I think you could see it in some ways of like Everett's baptism.
Right.
In some ways, right? He's come to the end of his reason. He reaches out to God. He receives that salvific baptism, right? It saves them, right? Even though immediately after, when he's all right, he does backslide and he's trying to explain it away.
It was a miracle.
Elmer, don't be ignorant. I told you there was flood in this valley.
No, that ain't it.
We prayed to God and he pitied us.
Well, it never fails. Once again, you two hayseeds are showing how much you want for intellect.
But that's when he sees the cow.
The cow.
On the roof of the cotton house that the oracle foretold. So the movie, the way it handles it, he kind of starts to backslide, but it doesn't end with him staying in that place. He's kind of made speechless by the things he has seen, I think.
He has... Yeah, I think that in some ways you could look at Everett as sort of like a lot of us, right? We see these things in our own lives, and sometimes if we're inclined toward a more reasonable scientific point of view, we try to explain these things away. But sometimes we come across things that we cannot explain. And I love the fact that the Coens sort of leave Everett's salvation, if you will, a little bit up in the air.
A little bit up in the air.
We know Delmar and Pete have they know that God was at work.
Yeah.
Ulysses may be a little bit on the fence. It's his old pride speaking, right? And I love that sense of ambiguity that the film lands on, at least in that portion of it.
Yeah. Well, and I think it connects with the other thing, the reason that they were there in the first place, and then kind of the final scene where Everett has conflict with Penny, his wife, is Penny wants the ring that they were married with if they're going to get remarried.
Yeah.
Well, Everett, again, as a man of reason, is like, it's just a symbol. It's just a thing, right? He doesn't click with these things of, the meaning behind this. He would see that as just sentimentality without purpose, let's say.
So I will confess that Oh Brother Where Art Thou may be my favorite Coen Brothers movie. And in part it's because the Coen Brothers are very well known, I think, for exploring religious themes, but oftentimes they come to a conclusion that life feels a little bit meaningless. We can't make sense of the randomness of life. Oh Brother Where Art Thou is one of the few films on kind of the Coen Brothers docket that says, yeah, you know what? Maybe there is meaning. Maybe we don't see it in the moment. Maybe we ignore it, but there is a hand at work. And I love that sort of take that this movie has.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and it is interesting because it feels like the Coens, throughout their movies, it can kind of feel like they go back and forth in certain ways. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I'll give you a theory and you can let me know if it makes any sense at all. But in movies like Oh Brother Where Art Thou, I think of a movie even like Hail Caesar, right? Which is, I wouldn't say a very spiritual film by any means, but they have moments where they lean into some humor with that. That movie's built around, I think, kind of a 1950s-esque biblical production a la Ten Commandments, right? A film production, right?
It's sort of a Coen Brothers deep cut.
Yeah, truly. But there's a moment in that where it's a biblical epic and it is about Christ, this fictional movie that they're filming. And George Clooney, who stars in that as well, at the end of that movie gives this incredible speech that's part of this film, and it's about coming to the feet of Christ on the cross, right? And it obviously he like flubs his line at the end, and then it's kind of played off as a joke, but there's still this element of spirituality and hope popping its head in, right? Even though, to your point, when they're dealing with this mortal coil, the here and now,
right,
a lot of it can feel it's random, It can feel very much like maybe a No Country for Old Men situation. It's just
right.
a flip of a coin.
The most you ever lost on a coin toss? I don't know. I couldn't say. Call it.
And that's a great example.
It can feel very nihilistic.
They were nihilists, man.
Huh?
They kept saying they believe in nothing.
Nihilists.
But yet there are these moments where, even though it seems like they're saying that about this world in which we live in, well, maybe there's something beyond this world. Maybe there's something that we can hope to, right? That kind of, it doesn't always pop in, but I think in certain movies it does. And I would say this is my favorite Coen Brother movie as well. I think it's their best. So.
Well, it has that sense of hope. It has that sense of looking beyond the circumstances that surround them and looking for something deeper. And we do find that Delmar, even though he's the dumbest, even though he's the simplest, he's also the purest and the closest we see in this movie to being a truly good guy. And there's that, I love that embrace of, you know, there's something to be said about being innocent. There's something to be said about being pure and idealistic and trying to do the right thing.
Absolutely. I think it's going back to that childlike faith. And I think in terms of blindness as such a theme, Delmar is the one that I think is the least apt towards spiritual blindness, right? Because of his nature and who he is. Everett is very spiritually blind. Pete has to wrestle with stuff constantly, right? Delmar is the one that I think has more of, he can see that vision very clearly, which I think is it's pretty cool. It's an interesting twist.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So one little bit of trivia.
Yeah.
Apparently, George Clooney, he jumped at the chance. This was, I think, his first movie with the Coen Brothers.
Okay.
He loved what they had done before, so he just jumped at the chance, and without even reading the script, he said, yeah, I'll do this. But then he had his uncle read the script over the phone so he could hear what it was. Apparently, his uncle is deeply religious.
Okay.
And he read the script while taking out all the profanities throughout. So George Clooney, who is fantastic in this movie, by the way, he comes in. He's not aware that there's so many profanities.
So this is the cleanest Coen Brothers movie.
What's going on? But we do have to talk a little bit about George Clooney because this really may be his best, most self-depreciating role. I love this role.
I love it too. I mean, he really dives into this, and you can tell he's having tons of fun. He's well suited for it. I mean, he is a fast talker. Always has an explanation for everything going along, and a lot of times.
And he thinks he's all that.
And he thinks he knows everything. Yes. So he's great in his character. John Turturro is great as the character of Pete. Just kind of that more kind of emotional core of the movie as well, obviously, right? Prone to outbursts and anger.
Who elected you leader of this outfit?
He'll, fighting, he tackles Everett at one point when Everett tells him that the treasure is a lie.
You ruined my life! I do apologize about that, Pete.
That he made up because he just wanted to get back to try to stop his wife from marrying Vernon T. Waltrip. So
I had 2 weeks left on my sentence.
I know.
That was the best.
I'll be 84 years old. And then Delmar says,
I'll be 82.
I'll only be 82.
Well, I'll only be 82.
Always looking on the bright side.
Always looking on the bright side.
Delmar.
Always looking on the sunny side.
Always looking on the sunny side. Yeah, exactly.
So my favorite scene actually with Pete is probably one of the first fire scenes. Fire is always very emblematic of danger or terror.
So they're burning them out of the barn. They're smoking them out, right?
Exactly. So Everett says that Pete's cousin sold them out, right?
Yeah.
And he refuses to believe it. And then right after that, you see the cousin down below say, oh, sorry, Pete, I had to do it.
Wallace is kin.
Sorry, Pete. I know we're kin, but they got this depression on. How I got to do for me and mine?
I'm gonna kill you, Judas Iscariot, hog wallop.
Never trust a hog wallop. Exactly.
Oh,
and
many scenes.
And that's a great scene. But in a lot of ways, Pete is kind of the man of action in some ways.
Right.
When it comes to those moments. But then they managed to RUNNOFT.
Get up, boys! I'm gonna RUNNOFT!
Get out of that situation.
Oh, man. So we have a review of this movie on our site now. Be sure to check it out before you start watching, because obviously we've mentioned.
Yeah, we mentioned. I think we should give it a little more time to just say, like, there's a lot of language.
There's a lot of language. It's a PG-13 movie.
It is a PG-13 movie. You're not going to hear maybe the harshest curse words out there, but it is pretty much just a steady stream in conversation.
All throughout it.
There's a lot of language, right?
Yeah.
There's a few scenes. There's some suggestive scenes with the siren.
The sirens.
Nothing really explicit there. For maybe some sensitive viewers, younger, I wouldn't show this to
and people
your
who love
8-year-old
cows,
or something like that.
Stay away from this movie.
Oh my goodness.
Cows. I hate cows worse than cappers.
Yeah, or frogs.
Or frogs.
You know these things give you warts.
There's some animal issues there. Yeah. Who knew George Babyface Nelson hated cows so much?
Man, oh man, that was the one area of this movie that didn't exactly work for me. Although I totally understand why it was in there.
The Babyface
Nelson. Yeah. I thought that he was sort of an interesting little side note.
Yeah, it felt very much like kind of a vignette. And then he pops up again at the end. Briefly.
But it actually does, now that I'm thinking about it, it does sort of get to that theme of pride that we see. Mm-hmm. Babyface Nelson, he wants to be known as George Nelson.
George Nelson, not Babyface!
Yep.
Doesn't want any of this babyface, and when he hears somebody whisper that, all of a sudden he's just successfully robbed the bank out of all this money, and all of a sudden his face falls.
Crestfallen.
He goes out. He throws all his money away.
Doesn't even care.
Slinks off.
Now, what do you suppose is eating George?
And then we see him at his happiest when he's being led off to the electric chair, apparently.
Hello, boys! Well, these little men finally caught up with the criminal of the century. Looks like the chair for George Nelson.
Where he is back on top. He wants to be that guy.
Yep.
His pride makes him want to be known.
Yep. And I guess we should also touch on Big Dan.
Big Dan
gets his comeuppance at the end. We find out he's a member of the Klan.
Right.
And, I think the way that the Coens do it as well is he's killed by a
falling cross.
A falling cross that lands on him too. So, just makes you think like, okay, was this a divinely appointed retribution in some ways? I don't know, but it's an interesting thing to think about. Not a nice guy.
Not a nice guy. Not a nice guy. Sometimes people call me Big Dan around here. I don't know what that means. So this has been our talk about Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
So be sure to check out the review before you watch. If you do decide to watch, hope you enjoy this conversation as sort of a tack on.
Like and subscribe if you like this video. Ring the bell for notifications so you can stay up to date, because we're going to be doing some more of these conversations, so you want to get updated if you like this when we have a new one coming out.
Yep.
And let us know what you thought. Have you watched Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Yeah.
What do you think of it? Have you watched other Coen Brothers movies? What sort of spiritual themes have you guys seen that have come out of movies like this as well? Not just Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, but we'd definitely love to hear from you on that.
And if you want to hear Brett sing Man of Constant Sorrow, you let us know that too, because he would be happy to sing if people ask.
Happy to. Overjoyed. In constant sorrow. Yeah. That's enough of that. They don't want
Maybe
that.
They don't want that. Thank you guys for watching. Really appreciate it. Do all those things that Brett said, and be sure to join us next time when we do another one of these plugged in rewinds on another fabulous movie. Talk with you later.
See ya. A cow on the roof of a cotton house.
Oh man.